Hi everyone, welcome back to Visually Hidden Selects. I'm Peter O'Brien, and today I would like to talk to you about Back to the Future from 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis and starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Tom Wilson. This film was co-written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who were a directing, writing, producing team that had previously made I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars. And both of those films were executive produced by Steven Spielberg, and they actually co-wrote 1941 for Steven Spielberg. But none of those films were really financially successful at the box office. It wasn't until Robert Zemeckis directed Romancing the Stone in 1984 that people began to become interested in Back to the Future. The basic premise for this film follows a young man named Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, who inadvertently travels back in time and then disrupts his parents' meeting, which compromises his very existence. And now it's a race against the clock in order for him to repair that relationship and get back to the future. And Michael J. Fox really was the number one choice for this role. Unfortunately, he was originally unavailable because of his commitment to a television series he was filming called Family Ties. And so they wound up casting Eric Stoltz instead, and they shot with him for about 5 weeks, and they just felt that it wasn't the movie that they wanted to make. So they fired Eric Stoltz and reapproached Michael J. Fox, who was very enthusiastic about the production and signed on, and so he had to film Family Ties during the day and Back to the Future all night for the duration of the shoot. Funny enough, he had seen them scouting the locations while he was filming another movie called Teen Wolf. And he completed Teen Wolf, went back to work on Family Ties, then picked up Back to the Future, and when it got out that he was making Back to the Future, the producers of Teen Wolf decided to delay the release of that film to piggyback off of the success of Back to the Future. And it worked out for them pretty well too. I mean, I love Teen Wolf, but it's no Back to the Future. And I think Marty is just a great character to guide the audience through this because he doesn't know exactly what's going on. He's learning it from Doc Brown as the audience is learning it, and so that way his journey remains engaging and his experience remains engaging for the audience throughout the entire film because he is constantly getting information as we are receiving it. But as cool and as crucial as Marty is to the film, Doc Brown really is the glue that holds this film together. He is the energy, he is the enthusiasm, and he is the exposition that really informs the audience as well as Marty. You know, he has some of the best lines in this film, and Christopher Lloyd just delivers them with such conviction. And he says everything so scientifically accurately. They're not going to a dance, they're going to a rhythmic ceremonial ritual. And it's that kind of outlook on the world that gets you to places like building a time machine in your garage. And I think that's really just a great character to hang a film on. And Christopher Lloyd plays the part to perfection. He really just gives a very strong performance that plays to all of his strengths, along with his chemistry with Michael J. Fox. They just bounce off of each other in such a magical way that puts them up there as one of the greatest cinema duos in history. But the whole cast is really fantastic, and not for nothing, with the whole Eric Stoltz situation, they basically had a 5-week dress rehearsal, but that really allowed them to sink their teeth into their characters and get exceptionally familiar and comfortable in a way that you don't exactly get during a production. And one of the coolest things about this cast is that most of the actors were very young, but then they had to have their aged counterparts. And so rather than cast 2 sets of actors to play the same role, they just cast really, really talented young actors and then did extensive makeup tests to find the right look for them as their older counterparts. And so Tom Wilson, Crispin Glover, and Leah Thompson, they're basically doing 2 sets of characters in the film because there's one set from the 1950s when they're young, and then another set from the 1980s when they're older. And I think one of the most interesting parts of the cast is actually Crispin Glover, who plays George McFly, Marty's father. If you know Crispin Glover or have seen any of his other films like The River's Edge or Friday the 13th Part 4, it really is a standout performance. And Tom Wilson's character Biff, he basically plays the villain and the bully. But it's funny because all of his cronies that are in his gang, I believe all were runners-up for Biff. So they basically just populated his little gang with different iterations of himself, including Billy Zane, who of course went on to have a fantastic career. He doesn't even have a single line in this movie. He's just part of the gang. And Leah Thompson as Lorraine, Marty's mom, really gives a very strong and dynamic performance because for most of the movie she's playing the teenage version of her character, but when she's first introduced as an adult in the film, she really just kind of lays out a lot of cards and she makes a very strong impression as that version of her character. Middle-aged, miserable, kind of drinking too much. And so when you go back in time with Marty, it's very impressive to see her shift into that role after being established as her older self. And the whole time, that's your introduction to her, so you're seeing her as Marty knows her. And then Marty gets to know her as a youth, and he finds a very, very different young lady than the one he grew up with. And there are basically two other inanimate objects that are a part of the cast. The first being the time machine, which is a souped-up DeLorean, and that kind of speaks for itself. The other inanimate character in this film is the town of Hill Valley, which, like its human counterparts, has a 1985 version and a 1955 version, which is drastically different. And it's pretty cool how they were able to just redress this location for the two different time periods. The town square is actually a set on the backlot of Universal Studios, and it was featured in a number of films going back to the 1950s up through present day. The year before, Back to the Future, it was featured as the town square in Gremlins, and it was actually, if you want to see what it looked like in the 1950s, it's in the first episode of the original Twilight Zone series. But it's been utilized in a number of different films, and they just always redress it or shoot it from different angles. But really, in Back to the Future, you get that full 360 degree, like there's no hiding in this location. And it's beautifully shot by Dean Cundey, who is, of course, one of my favorite cinematographers. He just knows how to light a frame, whether it's for emotional impact, whether it's for technical function, or whether it's just for getting through the story. He's showing you this time period through a very calculated lens. But I think that's one of the real neat things about this particular film is because it takes place in the 1950s, so there's an inherent nostalgia about it, and filming on the back lot just kind of heightens that element of the storytelling because it's also a throwback to that style of filmmaking. One of the greatest things about this film is the simplicity that's involved, and part of that comes from shooting on the back lot and having this isolated set location, but it's also, you know, you think of it like, oh, Back to the Future, it's a big science fiction film, it's a summer blockbuster, but it only has about 35 visual effects, most of which take place during the time travel sequences. It really is a straightforward kind of comedy that just happens to have a time travel element in it. And it's just that simplicity of the story, keeping it all in one location, keeping a lot of the same characters even though they're in different time periods. It's really a very simple film that's executed exceptionally well. And I think one of the things that really makes this film timeless and stand out for audiences even today, even 40 years after it was released, is the theme of the generation gap. That's something that's always going to be there. Children are always going to wonder what it was like for their parents, and that's something that just perpetuates across time. And so what this film does is it deals with it in a very fun way and a very kind of clever way, and it allows the audience to kind of partake in that what if scenario that they wouldn't otherwise get to explore. So that's it for Back to the Future. I really hope you like this recommendation, and please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future selections. If you do watch Back to the Future, please leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the film. We will be discussing it at length on the next Visually Hidden Selects podcast, so be sure to tune into that. And until next time, see ya!